Hi and hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this session we are hosting. Today we are going to be discussing a very interesting and a very important topic that's engaging the world at this point in time. We are going to discuss is one China policy, a Communist Party of China's weapon against democratic world. This is the topic that we have chosen to discuss. This event also marks Communist China's National Day, which is being observed today. So we are going to be giving an alternative to what China has been propagating in the last several years now, particularly since Xi Jinping went to the UN, said that China has something to offer as an alternative system, political system to the world. So we are going to debate this topic today. So we are also be going to discuss. We are also be going to try and thrash out issues regarding the threat posed by communist China to democracy and to the nations professing democracy. That is one of the issues that we are going to be debating. So I wish to greet good morning to all those who are joining from the Americas, essentially the United States and uh, Canada. I also want to greet good afternoon to all those who are joining from Europe and good evening to those joining in Asia and Australia. It's almost late in the night, around 10:30ish in Australia. Uh, so the topic today, the one China idea of the Communist Party of China is being, they have been insisting on it. The authoritarian rulers in Beijing are saying that it's a principle. What they mean by principle is that it is not negotiable. They won't negotiate on this aspect of one China, but we want to call it as one policy because policy can be amended, the policy can be revised, the policy can be uh, you can also have a relook at policy. So we are going to be calling it as one China policy. I believe that this insistence on the one China idea by Beijing uh, and essentially the Communist Party of China is to browbeat the democracies of the world, including India, which is its neighbor. Let me just elaborate on this topic, why we chose this topic, and before I introduce the speakers of the day and invite them to speak on the subject. Uh, History shows that communist China militarily occupied Tibet and East Turkestan in 1949, soon after they came to power in Beijing. They also, by that, they also created new boundaries and geographical borders with several nations, including India and also the other Turkic nations in Central Asia. We all know that most of the nations in this part of the world are democracies, be it India or be it most of the Turkic nations in the Central Asian region. Uh, uh, what has happened is that most of the Turkic leadership from East Turkestan are currently on exile. uh, and also those Tibetan leaders, national leaders of Tibet are also in exile at this point in time because of the occupation of these two regions by China. But interestingly, both the leaders of East Turkestan and Tibet have committed themselves to democracy. So it is a inherent duty of all the democratic nations around the world to protect the Uyghurs who are from East Turkestan and the Tibetans from Tibet, in India. Are you guys able to hear me clearly? There have been messages saying people are not able to hear me. Are you?
Now I can hear you properly.
Yeah.
Just the signal is not really great.
Okay. Sheng, are you able to hear me? Could you just open your mic and just say if you're able to hear me? Sheng, are you there? I think probably there is a connectivity issue there. Gompo, you're able to hear me?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay, great. So fine. So I was just talking about East Turkestan and Tibet committing the leadership of these two nations committing themselves to democracy. If you look at the East, say Taiwan, for example, the Communist Party, the Communist China claims the entire Taiwan as part of one China principle, but essentially the difference between Communist China and Taiwan is that the Taiwanese commit themselves to democracy. Of course, while Communist China is not a democratic nation and is essentially authoritarian and regressive, Taiwan is a vibrant democracy and follows all accepted norms of international behavior. Now, let us try and look at Hong Kong. It was a democracy until a couple of years ago. Hong Kong got transferred to Communist China by Britain in July 1997. And since then, Beijing was following this one nation, two system policy where they had an elected government in Hong Kong, whereas the rest of Communist China had a single party rule of the CCP. But all that changed 3 years ago after China brought in the security law to suppress the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. So effectively, Beijing has ended democracy in Hong Kong and also abolished the one nation, two system policy that it had been following. So democracy is under threat even in a place like Hong Kong, which is controlled by China at this point in time. There are also clear examples of how Communist China is a threat to the democratic world, as its recent rise in political stature globally has indicated. There is a continued Cold War with another democracy, the United States, and there is also blow hot, blow cold relations with democracies such as Australia and several European nations around the world. European nations and nations around the world. To India, which is the largest democracy, this one China policy poses a grave danger, and it's also a weapon used by Communist China against India quite often. First, it changed the borders by annexing both Tibet and Turkestan, thereby leading to the military conflicts that we have witnessed, including the one in 1962 and also one that is currently in progress in Ladakh. If Communist China emerges as the number one superpower, then there is all indication that democracy will be under peril globally. Xi Jinping is already tightening his control of the CCP and the administration in Communist China. He had a couple of years ago told the United Nations that Communist China has this totalitarian system of government to be delivered as a gift to the world. We say thanks, but no thanks, Xi Jinping. With this brief introduction of the topic, I would like to introduce the speakers. It is my proud privilege to host all of them here today. I'll start, it is not in particular order, but I'll just start with Ms. Nurgul Sawut. She is the executive chairperson of the Uighur Federation Forum and is based in Canberra in Australia. She is actually in exile. She's a Uighur who is in exile at this point in time. She has come under severe attack from the communist regime in Beijing, including cyber attacks and threats that have emanated from people committing themselves to Communist China. All of this because she has championed the cause of the freedom of the Uyghur people, and she has committed herself to democracy in East Turkestan. She joins us today from Australia. The second speaker of the day will be Sheng Zi. She is the co-founder and vice president of Canadian Coalition Against Communism, and she lives in Toronto in Canada. A person of Chinese origin, she lives in exile in Canada, and she joins us from there today. She's a strong votary of against Communist China and the communist movement generally, and how it poses a danger to democracies around the world. She's also a very close friend of mine, and I'm very happy to host her today in this event. We have Mr. Gonpo Dundup. He is the president of the Tibetan Youth Congress and is based in Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh here in India. He is, of course, again in exile from his country. Majority of this Tibetan community currently live in exile in India, and that includes his family. They have been forced to leave their homeland after Communist China forcibly occupied the Tibetan plateau in 1947 in a military operation against the peace-loving and highly spiritual Tibetan people. So with these, I welcome the three speakers for this evening, and I also thank all the participants for joining and to listen into the speakers today. A couple of administrative announcements before I call the speakers to speak. One, please switch off your microphones so that it doesn't open up and there is disturbance while the speakers are speaking. It has two purposes. One is as a mark of respect to the speakers themselves while they are speaking, and to also enable disturbance less recording of this event, because we're going to be sharing this recording to a wider audience after this event is over. For that purpose, I'm requesting you, all of you, to keep your microphones on mute. Also, if you have bandwidth issues with your Wi-Fi at your place, I would request you to switch off your videos so that at least you are able to hear the audio clearly while the speakers are speaking, because the idea is to send across the message that they want to share with all of us across the globe. So that is the idea. So these are my two humble requests to the participants. Also, if you have any questions, I would request you to please post it in the chat box, and also mention the name of the speaker to whom you are addressing, so that it becomes easier for me to pick it up and also post it to the person, to the speaker to whom it is addressed. So it's another request that I have. Also, I'm going to be posting a small link in the chat box. If any of you have not registered previously, and if you want to contribute to the activities of Law and Society Alliance, please do click the link and fill up that form. We will get in touch with you. Definitely, a lot of people today who are participants have come and joined Law and Society Alliance's activities through such links. So it is another humble request I have. With these, it is my proud privilege to call upon the speakers to speak. Now I request Nurgul Savut to make a presentation first. Nurgul, please.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing such fantastic webinar today. It is the 1st of October. For many people and from Chinese heritage or Chinese citizens, this is a great day for celebration, but not necessarily people like Uyghur, Tibetan, South Mongolian, and a lot of, the Chinese Democrats who's in exile. For those groups, we do not consider this is somewhat a celebration. This is for us is a strong sense of grievancy. So to me, today's topic is China's one China policy, and whether it's a threat to the democracy or not. I try to focus on just on Uyghur or East Turkestan based issues, because China's one China policies, there's two different wings, if I may expand on that. One is, if you look at the definition on one China policy, and it's generated in the early 1970s. The one wing is mainly China's foreign policy, how China actually sells this ideology to international community as far as they can, to try to promote. They only accept CCP-led Chinese government, and cut their ties with the Taiwanese government. Taiwanese government, and as we all know, it's a Chinese republic. So from their point of view, there's only one China exists. And eventually they push forward towards for international community to recognize Taiwan is a part of CCP-led Chinese government, and eventually one day they are going to move towards such a direction. And as I mentioned, it's the one of the wings of foreign policy. The other one is the very much a Chinese policy making, which is very much referred to internal policies. Um, we say internal policies, as you know, China always has this frontier, like unfinished business, because they never ever actually ask our permission to take over our land and our rights. It's a pure invasion. So that's why, as long as this colonial history exists, this problem is going to exist. It's going to continue. So the implication of the one China policy towards to the Western frontier, which is East Turkestan, mainly towards Uyghur people, is pretty much reflects on what UN report, the recent report indicated. Those are following the laws, how they actually promoted in the recent history, especially since 2014. One of them is as part of China policymaking exercise, they introduced the anti-terrorism law system. The anti-terrorism law system is very much reflects on two things. From China's point of view, as long as they get rid of terrorism and extremism in the Western frontier, from their point of view, it's our land in East Turkestan, it's everything will be solved, and that they can actually maintain a one China. So what they did, they introduced the national security law in 2015. They introduced the counterterrorism law in 2015. And also they introduced the specific implement the measures for counterterrorism law, how it's going to be exercised, so-called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and in 2016. And then once again, it's amended in 2018. And then we should not forget the Religious Affairs Regulation Law in 2014. And once again, it's amended in 2018 after the very first, the international pressure coming from like UN Human Rights Council and beyond. And also there was a de-extremification law in 2017. Once again, that was also amended in 2018. And so if you look at all these laws, why China go to extensive such lengths to introduce those laws, it's a very targeted, very specifically targeting and asked Uyghur people as well as Tibetans, and of course Southern Mongolians, whoever have a strong desire to claim their own independence, own self-determination, and be themselves in their own lands, of course. So then we have there's so many loopholes in what China is telling to international community in outside world and what they're actually exercising on their own rights. And if you look at their own white paper, which is released to international community back in March 2019, they spelled out the list of and so-called against terrorism and extremism measurement, like a 75 like a selection criteria. And if you look at all of them, and none of them is actually that fits into any such a law. The 75 a sign of extremism as a definition is a vague and a loose. Those lists of indicators for identifying the person at risk of extremists or the terrorism appear to be based on the elements that do not necessarily serve as actual or substantive indicators that individual has engaged or at risk of engaging any violent extremism or terrorist conduct. This is what UN report clearly indicated out in a point 27. And it's, if you look at the list, it's like for women, like we wearing scarf, having it wear long dress, and having like a certain our traditional attire as a part of our costume. That's our personal choice. There's nothing to do with against any law or we actually breaking any law whatsoever. For male, suddenly growing beard or cutting short and having certain the fashion of the beard, a long, short, doesn't matter. And also completely in their own choice decide not to drink alcohol. It's perfectly his personal choice. There's no way it's actually against any law, whatever China actually decide to exercise in their own rights under their own regime. So the legal base also create a perfect storm. And basically the legal base, what I actually indicated earlier, as so-called PRC's counterterrorism law system. And for China to conduct the largest and extensive and a much systemic genocide in their recent histories, a colonial history in East Turkestan. And when I come to this point, I really want to indicate Hong Kong National Security Law in 2019. Why? Because back then, we as activists at the time, we were watching very closely what's happening to Hong Kong, because we knew exactly what was happening to us. And in between 2016 all the way to very end of 2019, that 4 years period, we kind of almost get the sense Hong Kong will be put under the same category and the same criteria. It's going to introduce national security law, and which it happened. Now, there's a strong backlash and strong resistance inside Hong Kong as well as in the international community. There's a strong reason for that. And that has to be extended and explored more extensively. And coming back to our own issue, based on those legal bases, and China also created a list of like an exercise platform, like a so-called vocational education training centers. And we all know those 973 centers right across East Turkestan, as large as can contain up to 100,000 people, smallest as small as 1,000. It's all merely concentration camps. It's like a pretty much, it's a well-dressed, rehearsed, like the way of a Chinese authority explaining or trying to sell to international community as vocational training center. So no one believed now. It's a clearly UN report even disregarded. This is merely a dress rehearsal. It's nothing to do with education or nothing to do to improve any like employable skill of Uyghur people or other Turkic nations. And on the top of that, we have to remember we have such extensive, very vigilant surveillance system actually also established our own land. Now, that exactly the same system, now they also expanded to Tibet. So in the last 5 years, what they did, they not only actually AI-based establishing their surveillance system, they also established biological surveillance system, which is creating DNA database for everyone, not only facial recognition through AI, also on our DNA. So now they start collecting exactly same way collected DNA for our people in Tibet. So this is not something as simply actually they just like wake up overnight, try to decide to do it. This is, if you look at back in the history, the whole preparation actually voluntarily started way before Olympic. When Beijing Olympic introduced, China exactly knew where they're going, where they're heading. And China, at the time, 2008, a Beijing Olympic is merely Chinese way of selling themselves to international community as someone who's gentle, can coexist with the well-accepted democratic social value with the rest of the world. But underneath of that, and there's a like greatest, biggest, largest martial act actually on the way. And one of those, the Marshall Act, we all know is Belt and Road Initiative. It is purely economic expansion and invasion to weakest, most vulnerable nations around the world. And as far as go all the way to Africa. And I'm not going to go down to this detail. And coming back to one China policy is merely now displayed as CCP's imperialistic the future. It's nothing to do with that somewhat unite whole Chinese nation, nothing to do with reunification. And also because of the level of expansion, because of the way they're pushing outward, not only like oppressing their own people internally, it is very much seen as a threat to global democracy. So we need to accept that reality. And so I'm hoping through our activity, our activism, international community get to know more, learn more about what's going on, and then we work on it. And this is not only just the one, a specific community can do it. This is like a collective effect. So I want to wrap up my word, and we shall never forget and never stop of our very existence in the modern history of humanity. We are part of you all, and you are all part of our fight for very existence in this motherland, Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurgul. Very precise and very incisive analysis there. Thank you so much for this presentation. In fact, if you look at history, I think India was, they've always conceded a lot of things to communist China, starting with the Tibet annexation and then the East Turkestan annexation, the UN Security Council membership, and a whole lot of things India has conceded. But unfortunately, China has never reciprocated this kind of concessions that India has provided even once. Rather, it has been standing against India in important forums, including the United Nations Security Council membership, permanent membership for India, and also the nuclear security group's membership. So they've always opposed India, but unfortunately, India has conceded. I hope after the Ladakh crisis, there is some awakening in the Indian government, and they realize the threat that China poses to India and revise this one China policy immediately. They should not concede this one China policy at all. And we need to disband and junk this one China policy. That is what Law and Society Alliance is recommending. With this words, I now request Sheng, if you could just come up and speak. Sheng, are you able to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I had a problem of connecting to the software, either by my phone or my iPad. Yeah, I
We are
use
able
the
to clearly see you
software.
and hear you clearly, Sheng. Not an issue.
Yeah, I use the software many times, but I don't know what's wrong today. And I'm using my husband's phone now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please go
The
ahead and make your presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. The title of my speech will be "The World Should Support a Democratic China, Not a China of State Terrorism." Let me start my talking by talk about what is the One China policy and what is the One China principle. They're different. I just want to put those in a simpler way by my own words. What is the One China principle? Is that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's regime, requires countries with which it has formal diplomatic relations to commit to recognizing only the PRC as China and not the ROC, the Republic of China, as China as well. And what is the One China policy? The One China policy is that the countries that have the former diplomatic relations with the CCP commit to recognizing the PRC as China and not the ROC, or not taking a position on the nature of the ROC, the Republic of China, Taiwan. And where does the One China policy come from? The One China policy is a result of a compromise negotiated between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, that was a long and complicated process. In brief, at the time of early 70s, the United States needed to unite with the Chinese Communist Party's regime against the Soviet Union. Therefore, the One China policy is a result of the U.S. negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party from 1972 to 1979, and it's a result of the continuous compromise by the U.S., and the U.S. promised the Chinese Communist Party to break off diplomatic relations with the Republic of China in Taiwan and recognize only the Chinese regime as China. However, the United States acknowledged the One China position when signing the document, instead of using the phrase of recognize One China as PRC. The One China policy, which abandoned a republic founded in 1912, and it has become the rope that binds the United States to make a difference in the Asia-Pacific region. Beginning in the 1970s, more and more countries established the formal diplomatic relations with the CCP, the Chinese Communist regime, which also entered the UN and became one of its 5 permanent members. The ROC from Taiwan was expelled from the UN until now. Since then, more and more countries have established the diplomatic relations with the CCP regime. By last year, 181 countries had the relationship with CCP regime. Only 14 countries remain the formal relations with ROC in Taiwan. So the constitution of the ROC was adopted by the Constitutional National Assembly on December 25th of 1946. That was the beginning of the Republic of China, ROC, now it's in Taiwan. And what CCP established in 1949 after defeating the ROC was a communist tyranny. The ROC in Taiwan has been under constant military threat from the CCP regime, including 21 years of continuous selling of Taiwan from the CCP to, we call it Jinmen Islands. From 1958 to 1979, at the time when CCP has the formal relationship with United States. So under such a threatening of years from 1949, and Taiwan's ROC began its transformation into a democratic system and institutional state by the 1990s. Taiwan ROC has been abandoned by most countries. And today, we see Taiwan with freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law, and Taiwan is being very friendly with most countries or with the world, and with its culture very influential, and also the economic. The CCP regime then became the most powerful supporter of global terrorism, tyranny, and dictators. The CCP communist tyranny is infiltrating, buying, and intimidating, and economically invading the whole world, deeply affecting the security and the development of the whole world. And it is impacting the world. To name just 3 examples, the information that I have seen and the information released by the CCP before 2020, I do believe it's because of the CCP developing a biochemical weapon that caused the virus to spread globally since the early of 2020, causing the entire world to experience the massive loss of lives and the suffering of all people around the world. And the second, without Xi Jinping's commitment and support, I don't think that Putin would dare to invade Ukraine and causing a war that lasts almost 8 months now. And we do not know yet when the war is going to be end. And the third, the CCP has been threatening to attack Taiwan and has continually to have their live-fire military exercises and creating the threat to the lives of Taiwan and also tensions throughout the world. And in this process, of course, the United States, as well as those that have established the relationship with CCP, not Taiwan, should have the responsibility. And since the One China policy is the result of a concession and as a result of the negotiation, so it is talkable and it is changeable, and it is the time to talk about that and to change it. The United States just passed the Taiwan Policy Act. It's like 2 weeks ago, and giving Taiwan equal status as a non-NATO member and allowing the Republic of China presentation in the office to change its name to the Taiwan Representative Office. And the Japanese Prime Minister, he just said that he wished the UN to have a reform. It's about like two weeks ago. And I do support this action that the UN should have a reform. It's been a problem for so long time. And there may be many others would say the CCP's One China principle and One China policy is just based on because CCP loves the name of China or wants to maintain territorial integrity. And the CCP, I think many people know that, does not care about the name of China because the CCP established a Soviet Republic regime within China in 1931. And also, this is not the CCP's ambition for territory integrity, because since CCP established its regime, it has given up the land equal to 120 Taiwan. And I have noticed a Chinese scholar said that the CCP's One China principle and the One China policy is in order to keep order of its big house. And I think it's totally wrong. First of all, Taiwan has never been in the CCP's house. And secondly, the CCP has made China, the big house, very dirty and mess. And the CCP has been killing people crazily in the house. CCP from 1949 killed hundreds of millions of people, including Tibetans, Uighurs, and now Hong Kong become part of the big house. So we all see that the CCP is killing people in Hong Kong too. So should the world support CCP to occupy Taiwan? And why can't CCP tolerate Taiwan exist? It's just because the CCP cannot tolerate a democratic and powerful Taiwan. Xi Jinping, he wants to realize his imperial dream of occupy Taiwan. And the world that we are facing now is to support CCP as a state terrorist regime, or to support Taiwan as a democratic country of China, ROC. And also, if we support CCP, that means that we are supporting its killing to Uyghurs, to Tibetans, and to Hong Kongese, and to its Chinese. And it is a challenge and a question to the whole world to let Taiwan to be realized as a normal country by more and more country, and to support it as to support democracy, human rights, and rule of law, and to support ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shing, for that. In fact, while India, this is part of history. India agreed to the annexation of Tibet and East Turkestan by the Chinese in 1949. The communist China has never ever accepted India's stand that Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh are part and parcel of India. I think that itself indicates the expansionist tendencies of the communist China at this point in time, and it has been so ever in history. So I think it's time that we realize it, and we change the One China policy, we revise it, we don't accept it, we junk it, we throw it away in the dustbin.
Yeah, thank you. And if you remember that the same day last year that I spoke
Yes.
to this seminar, that I said India should have a very strong ties and stay solidarity with Taiwan and Japan, to maintain the order of peace in Asia. That India has a very very big responsibility to this. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, India has a great responsibility as the largest democracy of the world. India has the responsibility to recognize other democratic nations and also provide support to other democratic nations.
Absolutely.
I agree with you on that completely. Thank you very much for that very important point that you made. I have actually shared a link for people to register The first link is not the right link. The second time I've shared another link, which is a Google form. If anybody wishes to join LSA's activities or future events, I request all of you to please register there so that we can get in touch with you again in the future. With these, I call upon our next speaker of the day, Gonpo Dundup. Gonpo, are you able to hear us? Can you just come over and take over the stage?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm hearing everything. So good evening to all those who are joining from India and Asia subcontinent, and good morning to all those who are joining from West. Thank you, Devendra ji, and all the executive member from Law Society for organizing this important webinar. And I'm very much happy to join with two of my co-speakers to speak on this important topic. So two of my previous speakers have already spoke and covered on some of the issue. So I want to highlight measure on the Tibet case. So with the formation of so-called People's Republic of China in 1949, the dark era in global peace and harmony was already started. If you look at the transition process, the Chinese Communist Party took power in the China with a lots of bloodsheds, and thousands of innocent Chinese have lost their life. After forming the Communist Party in China, they started their expansionist policy. They started occupying Tibet, East Turkestan, southern Mongolia. With that, they pose a great security threat, not only to this occupied nation, but also to the neighboring Asia continental at large. So that these days, the Chinese communists try to mislead the global with their own narrative. They try to change the global history with the Chinese perspective. They say the human right in the Chinese perspective, freedom in the Chinese perspective, and all the democracy and everything with the Chinese perspective. In a nutshell, they have denied a basic human right to all the occupied nation under the Chinese Communist Party. Moreover, they are creating a civil threat to the neighboring nation. China, they try to mislead the Western nation with their different propaganda mechanism, and also they try to mislead the weaker nation with their economic and political power and pressure. It is our responsibility to make China accountable. We, the Tibetan, we, the Uighurs, we, the Southern Mongolia, have a real experience of Chinese expansionist policy. So we are advising, and we are sharing our own experience to all the free nation. Be aware, be careful with the Chinese expansionist policy. Since 1949, the China, in the name of development, they started their occupation journey inside the Tibet. They started occupied the eastern part of Tibet, and finally in 1959, they occupied the capital of Tibet, which is Lhasa. In 1959, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetan people were forced to seek refuge in India. Since then, there is a continuous resistance movement from Tibetan, both from inside and outside Tibet. So last 6 decades, we the Tibetan have been continuously carrying out all the resistant activity to safeguard our own nation, to restore the complete independent Tibet. The People's Republic of China, time and again, in a different policy, in the name of revolution, they tried to convert a Tibetan into a Chinese, Uyghurs into a Chinese, Southern Mongolia into a Chinese. But they are not successful in their own journey. Since last 6 decades, they have tried many things. They have implemented many policies. They have introduced a harsh system inside the Tibet, Uyghurs, and in the South Mongolia. But all the brave people inside Tibet, East Turkestan, and in the Southern Mongolia have shown their courageous against the Chinese weapon, against the Chinese military artillery. Our resistance, vice, and movement are continuously carried on. If you look at the Tibetan history, since 1959, China have firstly introduced a cultural revolution in Tibet. They have destroyed more than 6,000 Tibetan monasteries. They have killed millions of Tibetan people. They tried to change Tibetan mindset. They brainwashed the younger Tibetan generation, but they are not successful to do. They are not successful to convert a Tibetan to Chinese, which was clearly proved by the brave Tibetan inside Tibet in 1978, 87, 88, and 89. There was a continuous resistant movement by the Tibetan inside Tibet. Since then, China have introduced some kind of economic beneficial policy in Tibet. They thought that they can change the Tibetan mindset, or they can convert the Tibetan into Chinese by their minimal economic benefits. But that too was proved wrong in 2008. In 2008, when the Summer Olympic was organized in the Beijing, Tibetan from all the three traditional regions rose up against the Chinese Communist Party. There's all the generation of Tibetan people have rose up and fought against the Chinese illegal occupation of Tibet. That proof that whatever the policy the Chinese government, the CCP, adopted, Tibetan people will be bold enough to stand against their repressive policy. After 2008, they introduced a very harsh policy, a very harsh treatment against all those who have involved and indulged in any kind of political activism work. Since from 2009 till date, more than 159 Tibetan inside Tibet have self-immolated for the just cause of Tibet. This is the sacrifice that Tibetan can make. This is the sacrifice that we, the Tibetan, Southern Mongolia, or we, the Uighurs people, can make against the Chinese illegal occupation of our nation. So we, all the activist group, are based outside our own nation, and we are in the free nation. We have a right to raise the voice of innocent, voiceless people who are still suffering under the CCP rule. So our message and our voice is loud and clear that we will continuously carry all the resistant activity until our ultimate goal to the restoration of complete independence of Tibet, East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia is restored. So now the China, with their expansionist policy, they are introducing all their influence and trying to occupy, and they are extending their influence in Hong Kong. They are trying to create a disharmony in Taiwan. They are trying to create over and again kind of intrusion in all the border area. We always say that we the Tibetan call for Tibet independent is not just for the Tibetan people. We always say India shared a very peaceful border with Tibet for a century. From Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, more than 3,000 kilometers, we have a peaceful coexistence between the Tibetan and all the Himalayan brothers and sisters. After the illegal occupation of Tibet in 1959, now the Chinese PLA continuously creating a problem, continue over and again intrude in the Indian territory. So we always say that Tibetan people call for the independence of Tibet is not just for the Tibetan, not just the cause of Tibetan people, but it's also for the well-being of India's national security. If you look at the global ecosystem, Tibet is situated at the very unique geographical location. 2/3 of the South Asian nation depend on the freshwater sources from Tibet. Now the China is diverting all these water resources either to their mainland China, or they are polluting all these water resources. They are polluting the third pole of world, and that impact will definitely be carried out in the global ecosystem. So for the global ecosystem and peaceful and the harmony world, it is important to be a Tibet, East Turkestan, and the Southern Mongolia to be an independent nation. So with our own experience of 2019 this pandemic, now the death and destruction of this pandemic is borne by all the global community. So we have a moral responsibility to make China accountable for all this death and destruction. So this global pandemic have given a good opportunity for all the activist body like us. Earlier, the many nations, especially the European countries, consider China as a profit-making nation. But with this pandemic, now they become clear, they were aware of what kind of government this CCP is. That there's a different perspective, some with the very scientific reason. They mentioned that this is a biological made weapon. Or this is the proof that is because of Chinese mismanagement of this pandemic in the Wuhan, we have to bear all this death and destruction. So now it's our responsibility to make China accountable for all the death and destruction caused by this pandemic. Moreover, it's our responsibility to safeguard this global community from this Chinese expansionist policy. So we always say that the very existence of so-called People's Republic of China is not only threat for all the occupied nation, but is also threat for the global peace and harmony. So during our journey of non-violent, peaceful, resistant activity of Tibetan people, we were many times asked by the many people that how can you expect how the Tibetan people, how the Uighurs, how the Southern Mongolia, how the Hong Kongers can expect a free and independent nation when the China is in a superpower. They have a veto power, they have a military, economic, and all this power they possessed. So our answer was very clear. No one ever imagined in 1970 and the 80s the disintegration of USSR. So during the Cold War period, there were two hegemony, US at the one side and their competition partners USSR. So what happened in 1991 with the many conditions, with the geographical, with the political turmoil that was going inside their nation? So what happened to the USSR these days? So the disintegration of Union of Soviet Socialist Republic clearly proved that there is a possible of the disintegration of so-called Chinese Communist Party. And we always say that India as a leading democratic nation have a moral responsibility to safeguard the voice of all the suppressed nations. India is now the emerging superpower. So we, the Tibetans, have a great gratitude, and we are very much indebted with the solidarity and the support we, the Tibetan, and all the activists we have received from the people and the government of India. But India, as a leading democratic nation, have a moral responsibility to safeguard the voice of all the oppressed nations, especially under the Chinese Communist Party. And the Indian government have a responsibility to have a strong and concrete national policy against the Chinese Communist Party, not only to safeguard the Tibetan people, not only for the well-being of all the oppressed nation, but for the India's own national security. It is an urgency and it's a very much important to have a strong foreign policy against the so-called People's Republic of China. Otherwise, the PRC and the PLA will make a continuous problem in all the disputed area. So earlier, as I mentioned earlier, we have a very peaceful coexistent relation with the Tibetan and the Himalayan brothers and sisters. Now that China is creating problem over and again in all the LAC, which started from Ladakh till the Arunachal Pradesh. So with this, I want to conclude that we, the Tibetan, we, the Uighurs or the Hong Kongers call for an independent is not just for our well-being, not just for the safeguard of our own people, but we are doing all this resistant activity for the well-being of global harmony and peaceful society. Thank you.
That's once again a very powerful presentation, Gonpo. Very powerful message there, particularly the security aspect. And I really want to highlight one point that you mentioned about the ecological disaster that the Communist Party of China is creating in the Himalayas. So it's a major threat. Thank you for pointing that out. I think I also agree that India as the leading democratic nation in the world needs to take the leadership role in voicing against Communist Party of China and also voicing for the oppressed and the suppressed nations, under the CCP. I agree with you completely on that. Thank you for this point once again. I think there are not many questions that have come from the participants. So what I will do is I'll just make an announcement. I think all of you have covered the issues relating to our topic today very comprehensively. So I don't think there is any requirement for any clarification that needs to be sought from you. However, I just have one question which I will commonly pose to all the three panelists, and each of you can come in the same order and then try to address this question. You know, the topic of the day is that how, I mean, you covered all this, but just want to understand one small issue in that. You know, CCP is using this one China idea as a weapon to browbeat the democratic world, not only just here, but also around the world. It's been pushing this principle everywhere. Probably, I think there is a need for a global movement against this idea of one China. Where can we take this forward? How can we take this forward? If each of you could address this question, one by one in the same order, I think with that we'll take it as closing remarks and then we'll end this session. Uh, Before you answer that question, I just want to make one announcement. The next Saturday, we're going to be having another event, and we're going to be dealing with the subject of how communist China has been supporting and extending support to terrorism emanating from Pakistan by stopping and scuttling every move that is made in the UN Security Council to designate some of these terrorists, as an international global terrorist. So in the last 1 year, 3 such resolutions have been scuttled by China using its veto power in the UN Security Council. I think it is time has come for the entire democratic world to throw China out of the United Nations Security Council, find a way to do that, and probably add other nations like India, South Africa, and Brazil as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. With this announcement of our next event, I now ask you to address this question of how to take forward and where can we start to take it forward, this fight against CCP using one China idea as a weapon against the democratic world. Nurgul, you can go first. You're on mute, Nurgul. We can't hear you right now.
Sorry, would you mind rephrase the question again? And I find the question is a bit broad, and I just unable to narrow down my answers.
The idea is
Sorry.
that basically this weaponizing of this one China idea is a global threat to the democratic world.
Yep.
Is there a possibility of some coming together of forces all around the world to start a campaign against this, say in Europe, in Americas, and other parts of the world also? Because people in India, most of us have already realized the kind of threat this one China policy, poses. So, how to take it forward? That was my question.
Okay. Right. There's a couple of things already covered and by Shungxue as well as Gobunja. And so for me, there is a couple of things I really want to expand a little bit more. And one thing actually I just happened to be, now I'm thinking a little bit broader when Shungxue managed to compare one China principles versus one China policy. That's just something very critical. It's not many people actually understands one China policy is only applies to whether this is a soft weapon as foreign policy of China when he trying to expand. Sorry, I'm genderizing here. When China expand its political influence as well as a diplomacy towards to like a south side of global, which is more likely developing countries, and including developed countries, of course. And we should never ever forget and how it started in 1972, which is very much it's a deal between United States and then China. Whether you accept Taiwan or dump. And at the time, United States really did actually dump Taiwan and go with the CCP-led China. That was a historical mistake. Now we're paying for it. So now we're coming back to the principal part. The principal part, what China did is actually very diligently, very skillfully, that from Jiang Zemin period to going into Xi Jinping, they created what they call almost like a one nation ideology, like a bring whole the ethnicity. And don't forget, in China, self-claim, we have a 55 ethnic, the nations. And when they come up with this ideology, it's very much far-right nationalist ideology. They pretty much disregard all the ethnicities or ethnic groups of rights, and as well as responsibility in their own land. So around that, at the same time, they introduced some very critical laws and pretty much strip away what their own, like a CCP promise when they step in, promote the annexation of Tibet and East Turkestan back in the 1949. And the whole so-called autonomous rights and all the language rights, land rights, and including so other policy attached to those agreements all gone. But those kind of like a soft shift happening inside of China, and very gently and yet aggressively. But international community didn't pay attention to that. And what's happening now, we come up with such aggressive draconian regime without using a weapon. Weapon is no longer an issue. They're using digital weapon, which is pretty much coming up with the digital governance system and selling it, introducing globally, pretty much controlling the democracy and as well as people's movement and civil society through their self-made, that digital governing system. And we should not forget about this. This is also part of the Chinese one China policy, principles. And also, as part of that whole exercise, it is economic, the consequence. They spend 6 trillion on the Belt and Road Initiative. Why? They knew they can actually push this agenda forward. At the same time, they knew how to control the resource, which is the major part of global development and the next, this century and the next. So this is kind of really long, 50 years length forward the exercise plan. Very much every parts of this whole exercise, all to do with how to control the global movement. And we will know once the things going into P-shape, which is a far right a nationalist movement, it's nothing to do with the democracy. The power very much controlled and concentrated on a specific regime. So if we look at the China, actually it's actually exercising what they're doing is pretty much putting everything at risk. Our climate, our economy, our even the basic security, a safety on living on this earth. And think about this COVID, the pandemic. We've been going on and on since 2019. When it's going to end? And this is the way of controlling as well. And have a look inside of China. Zero COVID policy. How beautiful is that, the way they put forward? Everything is rolling around. And the China always step ahead when it comes to how to control, how to come up with this brilliant idea up against our democratic values. So I never ever underestimate what China can come up with next. So for me, we have to be vigilant, we have to be thoughtful, and we have to be open-minded in terms of the safety and the security of not only our own democracy and the democracy around the world. When it comes to democracy, I'm actually very keen to listen what is actually said earlier. India is a good point. You mentioned a very good point. India is the largest democratic nation in Asia, and there's a very understandably, there's a two democratic system spontaneously at the moment flourishing. One is the traditional Western democracy and its value. There's another value system, which is also in Asia, and we have our own democratic system and a value system also developing. So there's a difference, there's a similarities, there's a common ground, and there's also the common value we all can come forward and protect and safeguard. So I want to pass on the comments to other two the speakers. That my point of view is this is something we need to work together. We need to collaborate, and we need to not just letting just through the whole task into a specific community or a specific group. Let them do the hard work. That requires strong sense of collaboration in this sense. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you on that. Sheng, would you like to make your last comments on this?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And of course, she gave the very nice, very important comments. And I think there are three levels action that need to be taken. The first, since the One China policy was the result of negotiation and compromise by the United States with CCP, the Chinese Communist regime. So it is a policy that negotiable. And I think the United States should take actions to change it. And I was very happy that the United States passed the Taiwan Policy Act. That was a very meaningful step that I wish that the United States could go further and to give a more strong support to Taiwan. And the second step, I think, is very important with UN because ROC, the Republic of China, was the signature of the UN Charter, and its name still remains as it was. And ROC, the Republic of China of Taiwan, should be allowing to come back to be the member of the permanent member of UN. And we can see the real situation now with UN. China, the Chinese Communist regime with Russia are two members of the five of the permanent members of UN, makes UN cannot take any meaningful actions around the world. It's been like over half a century, and this situation needs to be changed. And some people said that this kind of situation is unchangeable, but we need to remember that Republic of China (ROC) now in Taiwan was one of the signatories when the UN was established. So the things have been changed. Why cannot we make change now? And the third step, I really hope that country as India should take more action to support Taiwan, a democratic country, and it has a lot of good influence to the world. And this is a very important process to balance, not balance, to limit the threatening from the CCP. And if these three actions has been taken, that whether the one country policy or the one country principle won't have any room, any space to take actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheng. Another very important point on the UN question. Thank you very much for that. Gonpo, would you like to make your comments on that?
Yeah, so the most of the points are highlighted by two of our panelists, Nuko and Sheng. So I don't want to repeat. But if you look at the current, the PRC, People's Republic of China, if you look at their geographical location and the census, 2/3 of their areas are an occupied nation. If you separate, if you give an independent to Tibet, the Turkestan, southern Mongolia and Manchuria, the mainland, the hardcore Chinese are very limited. And the one China policy of China is just to make an excuse, is just to pressurize all the free nations to not to speak in favor of all these oppressed nations. Or in the internationally, they are pressurizing all the nation to not to be a pro-justice, pro-democracy, or pro-human rights. So this is the political mechanism of so-called People's Republic of China to pressurize all the independent nations. And second thing, today's topic is regarding the democratic. We, the Tibetan, values the democratic. With the experience that we gain from the democratic institution in India, so the Central Tibet Administration or the exile government body that we have in exile community is democratic form of institution. So with the visionary leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the good experience that we gain from the host country India, so the institution and the administrative services or the activity that we carried out in exile are completely based on the democratic form of the democratic structure. So this is the thing that the Chinese Communist Party should learn from us. So we experience a democratic from the India and all the free nation, especially we got this all the experience from the leading democratic nation like India. So this is our message towards the CCP, that you can't always control the voice of people with the guns and the bullets. One day there will be outbreak of the people aspiration, people desire, and the people voice, and that time you will be not able to control it. So there will be a repetition of the Tiananmen Square. There will be a repetition of the uprising of Tibetan people. There will be a repetition from the uprising of East Turkestan and southern Mongolia. Then that time you will not be able to control all these voices, all this demand, and all this design. So in the democratic institution, we will continue to carry all the different resistant activity until our ultimate goal to restore complete independence is achieved. Thank you very much, this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, it's been an interesting and an enlightening debate or a discussion that we have had today. The presentations from all the three speakers, Nurgul, Sheng, and Gonpo. Thank you very much, all three of you, for these wonderful presentations. Very important key points you have made. At this time, I only recall our former External Affairs Minister, Srimati Sushma Swaraj. In fact, soon after the Narendra Modi government came to power in 2014, I believe, I think it was early 2015 or so, January, February 2015, when she had her first meeting with the Communist Party of China's Foreign Minister Yang Yi in New Delhi. And I believe as they were finishing their conversation, they were walking out and Srimati Sushma Swaraj raised this issue of this one India idea, why China should not concede this one India policy if they want India to reciprocate with on the one China policy. I think that was the right direction that Sushma Swaraj took the debate and discussion with the Communist Party of China. With the experience of history, with the knowledge of dealing with the Chinese, the Communist Chinese for so long, the Communist Party of China for so long, I think the time has come for India to revise the one China policy, to discard it completely, to junk it completely, and extend support to the Uighurs, the Tibetans, the southern Mongolians, the Manchurians, the Hong Kongers, and the Taiwanese in their struggle for democracy. I think it's high time India does that. With this, I want to thank the host of the day, Law and Society Alliance, for giving all of us this opportunity to listen to these wonderful conversations that we have had. I now request the General Secretary of Law and Society Alliance, Advocate H. Kumar Vaidyanathan, who practices law in the Mumbai High Court. He is here today. Fortunately, he has been able to join. Last two events, he was not able to join because of his travel and technical difficulties. He is here today. I request him to propose a vote of thanks to conclude this event. Kumar, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Vipin. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you so much. Today we had a very interesting debate on the One China policy, and the speakers were all very articulately. They have come up with points by which we can take this forward. And for people who have joined us very recently and were not aware of Law and Society Alliance, I just want to say that Law and Society Alliance is a Indian national growth organization, and it conducts a lot of such debates and programs, and is also doing a lot of groundwork. And this is yet another interesting program in which the speakers have very nicely shared their knowledge and have given us points to go forward. I thank you all speakers for taking out time in this very useful debate for all of us. And I also thank the participants who have joined today. And for people who want to join us regularly, like Vipindra ji has said, you can get connected through the link which has been shared there in the program. And like always, Bipin ji, it was a very good session. Thank you for moderating it for all of us. And Law and Society, thanks all of you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kumar, and I thank all the executive committee members who are here today listening to this program, for joining and also for facilitating this event. With this, I want to conclude. Thanks everybody. Have a great evening, those who are in India, and good night to people who are in Australia. Thanks everybody, and you have a great day, Sheng and others who have joined from the Americas and Canada. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. With this, I'm ending this session.
Thank you.